Then came the worst bike I ever owned. The Honda CB250N Superdream. It was slow. It was all the bad things that people had said about Honda Superdreams. But I was skint. But I wanted a motorbike. And that's what you get when you have no money. You want a motorbike. You end up on a 250 Superdream. What's worse is when I bought it, it had no front brake. There was no front brake fluid. The lid had gone off the master cylinder. So before taking to the road, the first thing I had to do was to sort out the front brake. The way I did that was to take the base off a digital watch case, use that black plastic base as a fake lid to the master cylinder, held on with black insulation tape. I never had a front brake on that bike. I had a back brake. Does that help? Extremely stupid and reckless, but I didn't ride like that for long, thankfully. The next bike, this is about 1995 sometime, was a Yamaha XS400, double overhead cam model, which I bought off my best mate. I can't remember how much for now. The best thing about that bike was the laser exhaust end can, which my mate put on. So it was pretty much a straight through exhaust. There was no baffle in the end of that can. In fact, you can even see some carbon blow by on the rivets on the end can after the baffle was removed. So that was a bit of fun. That bike took quite a thrashing. Quite bouncy suspension. Front brake was pretty decent with that braided hose on it, even though that hose was a bit longer than it really should be. That bike was a good bit of fun for not a lot of money. People of a certain age might recognize the logo on the seat. I had to have the seat recovered at one point because it had split. And yeah, all the local guys went to the same person to have the seat recovered. Although you can actually see the crease where the foam had split on the rider's seat. Probably something to do with my farts. I think I had a year or 18 months away from bikes after that XS. I think I had the XS for a year or so. Sold it. Oh no, I didn't sell it. Oh no, I didn't sell it. Oh yeah, right. I swapped it. I swapped it for a Renault 18 Estate. And so began my car owning journey with this really ropey, huge hearse of a car. But I missed having a bike. So around about 1999, I got another bank loan. And I went down to what is now Thunder Road Motorcycles, but at the time was Claremont Motorcycles, Honda dealer. And I bought a second-hand Honda VFR 750F. This bike was in limited edition HRC colours. I had always had a thing for VFR 750s, so when I saw this bike for sale, I fell for it pretty quickly. There were much better bikes out there to buy, but they would require more money than I had. So this was the best thing I could get in my mind for my budget. So it was my first proper kind of bigger motorcycle. And for that, I absolutely loved it. Fast, smooth, handling was decent, not great, but decent enough in the beginning anyway. I say that because I put quite a few miles on that bike over the course of a couple of years. So the suspension did get rather worn out by the end. And the 16-inch front wheel didn't help with the handling really. But at least at the beginning, it was a sophisticated machine, smooth. It was quick, sounded glorious. Had some good times riding around the lanes, trying to keep up with my best mate, who by then had a ZX-7R Kawasaki, and another mate of ours who also had a ZX-7R. So we went riding around with me looking like someone from literally another generation trying to keep up with these young boys on their fast machines with their upside down forks and huge tyres. And the VFR was actually quite good in the low gears. In the first 3 gears, it was not far behind the Kawasaki's at all. But obviously, as the speed got higher and a few corners were thrown into the mix, my bike started to lag behind. Nothing to do with my talent, or lack of. I had to change the end can because the exhauster started rotting and rattling. So I had a local bike shop graft on a oval carbon end can that I got off my best mate. It used to be on a 600 Fazer, and it sounded amazing. I might just have somewhere a sound recording of that, which hopefully I will throw into this video. So this bike could be the best sounding bike I've owned. I think though I ended up, I'm not sure how I got from this bike to the next bike. I think I traded it in and I don't think I got a lot of money for it. I think I got to the point where I just wanted something newer, more modern, and so I traded it in against the next machine. That next machine was a Kawasaki ZX-6R G2. I think it was T-Reg, 1998 or 1999 model. I got another bank loan, strangely enough. This was a revelation. Obviously not as big CC wise as the VFR, but quicker, and the handling was amazing, and the brakes were phenomenal. Yeah, I really felt like I'd properly arrived with this bike. Around this time, my best mate had a Yamaha YZF-R6, similar age, so we had a good amount of fun thrashing these bikes around. The bike already had the quill end can, and I think the only mod I really did to this bike was to put a disgustingly large double bubble fairing screen on it, which looked horrible, but at the time this bike was my only form of transport, and I was doing 40 miles a day commuting back and forth to work, so I felt like I needed more wind protection, but that screen was horrible. Where it was legally permitted, officer, I actually got 172 miles an hour on the clock, which is still the fastest I've ever had on a clock. I'm sure the real speed was quite a bit lower than that. The bike had about 8,000 miles on the clock when I bought it, and by the time I sold it, after around about 2.5 years, I think, it had 42,000 miles on the clock. So yeah, it had quite a few miles on it. I rode it through 2 winters as well. And towards the end, the bike had developed a problem with the front brake. I'd lost stopping power. I'd spent hours bleeding and re-bleeding the brakes without any effect. I went to several shops and no one could tell me what was wrong. I only asked for advice. I couldn't afford to let them check it because I had no money. So no one could tell me what was wrong and just suggest I kept bleeding it. After a while, the front brake developed a vibration as well. Possibly like a warped disc. But I couldn't afford new discs. So I got to the point where I was running out of money. I'd fallen out of love with the bike. And so I sold it to Roadrunner Motorcycles in Stroud, where I bought the CB400N from previously. I'd sold the ZX6 in August 2003. So there's another little break. In March 2005, I cobbled together enough money to buy a second-hand Honda CBR 600. This bike was J-regged, so 1992 model. I bought it off a guy in Bristol in the dark. Something you should never do, buy a motorcycle from somebody in Bristol. Only joking, I meant buying a motorcycle in the dark. But I got fairly lucky. The bike was a bit of a dog. And I didn't realise until some months into ownership that the top front fairing was actually an aftermarket one. So the bike had obviously been down the road at some point. And while it wasn't as fast as the ZX-6R, or handle as well as the ZX-6R, at least it braked better than the ZX-6 did at the end. So it braked properly and it sounded glorious. For some reason that cheap end can that it had with that horrible sticker made the bike sound brilliant. It sounded lovely. It was it is vying for best sounding bike that I've ever owned with the VFR. Just like I had a thing with VFRs, I had a thing with CBRs as well. So although this wasn't a great example of a CBR 6, I was happy to own one. Had it for about a year, and yeah, did enjoy that one. My next bike, after another little enforced break, was a Yamaha FZS 600 Fazer. Now, my mate had bought a black Fazer new previously, owned it, then he went up to a ZX-7R, wrote that off, and then he ended up with this second-hand silver Fazer, which had been left standing in a shed for quite a while. This was my mate's first bike back on the road after writing his ZX-7R off and breaking several bones in his body. So he moved from the Fazer to Yamaha R6, and I bought this Fazer off him. Another bike that wasn't a great example of the breed. It was nowhere near as nice and as smooth as his original black brand new 600 Fazer. This machine had not been treated very well. The engine had quite a lot of vibration to it. Didn't handle brilliantly either, but it went well enough. It was fine and it was cheap, so I was happy enough to be back on the road, and I was paying him off monthly, so that wasn't too bad either. The bike had to live outside. It spent a winter without a cover, and once spring had come around, I decided to get it running again. It would not run properly. It was a very, very strange problem that I had with the bike. You'd start the bike, it would run, it would tick over fine. But as soon as you started riding it, or almost as soon as you started riding it, it started running like an utter dog, missing, stalling, just running really badly. Then you put the bike away, come back a couple of days later, and the same thing would repeat. I couldn't suss out what was going on. I checked the HT leads, I changed the spark plugs, and that was kind of the limit of my mechanical knowledge. But I did check the throttle position sensor, that was fine as well. Eventually I had to take it to a bike shop, and they had found water in the carbs. They cleaned the carbs out, got the bike back to me, but I found that the problem had come back almost immediately. So it still wasn't working properly, so the bike had to go back to the shop again. And they were really flummoxed as well. They couldn't understand what was happening until they noticed the root cause of the problem. The root cause was actually a lot of rust in the petrol tank underneath the fuel cap. So basically where a seal would be, there was a lot of rust, and it was letting rainwater into the tank. That rainwater would settle on top of the fuel, and so that explained why if I started the bike at a standstill, the bike would run well, because initially it would be clean fuel going into the fuel pump and into the engine. But as soon as you started riding it, the water would mix with the fuel, and Yeah, the bike didn't like that. I can't actually remember how I got that sorted now, whether the top of the tank was treated and a new seal put in, or whether we just bought a second-hand tank and banged that on. I can't remember. So the bike was okay. It was good enough. It was cheap and got me back on the road. That was the important thing.